So long before Game of Thrones, long before The Sopranos, even before JR and the whole Dallas crew, there was Genesis. What you might call the original soap opera. The original family dynasty that goes on with everything you would expect. Subterfuge, lack of communication, evil twins even. It's really quite the story. And so in fact we pick up with the character that we heard about last week with Isaac. Now the last time we heard about Isaac was in a bit of trouble, a bit of danger, and God sweeps in at the last minute. And now when we pick up this week, we're fast forwarded to the very end of Isaac's life. Now in that time, he's married a woman named Rebecca, and they've had children. First, two twins. The first twin, Esau, red-haired and strong and ready, and his younger twin, Jacob, who came out just after Esau, and it says holding on to his heel. He came out. And in fact, if you go into Hebrew, as names so often have connections to their characters, Jacob means, when it's a noun, heel, and it is a verb, to follow after. And so you have these two twins, and much like a soap opera, they're not always up to much good, but it's kind of hard to tell which is the good twin and which isn't. And so they have a somewhat fraught relationship, as siblings are wont to do at times. But when Isaac was old and he couldn't really see anymore and he knew his days were numbered, he called his eldest son Esau in and said to him, "My son." And Esau answered, "Here I am." Remember that from last week, Hanani? And he said, "I'm old and I don't know the day of my death. So here's what I need you to do. Take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me." You see, Esau was what we might call a man's man. He was burly and hairy, and he loved to hunt, and he was Isaac's favorite. And Isaac loved the food that he'd bring back from the hunt with him, so he said, "Go out to the field and hunt and bring back game for me, and then prepare me the savory food, you know how I like it, and then I'll bless you before I die." So Esau heads out to do just this, but then the camera pans back, and it's revealed that Rebecca has been listening at the door. Now, just as Isaac has his favorite, Rebecca has a favorite too. And where Isaac loves Esau's strength, Rebecca loves Jacob. Jacob isn't burly or macho in the same way that Esau is. He said he's very smooth, which I think means he couldn't grow a beard even if he wanted to. And where Esau is out in the field hunting and doing acts of, masculinity, Jacob's more likely to stay in camp, to be cooking, to stick around his mother perhaps. He might be a bit of a nebbish. And so Rebecca sees what's happening here, and she acts quickly, because as a woman at that time, she didn't have much sort of legal power. She didn't get to determine this. Isaac got to make the decision. The laws were clear. Esau was the eldest son. Esau got the birthright. Esau got the blessing. But Rebecca, like many women before and since who live in patriarchal societies, finds a way to get stuff done anyway. She goes to her younger son, Jacob, and gives him Esau's clothing and says, "Put this on." And then she sends him out to go kill two of the sheep that had been in the yard so that she can prepare savory food to give to Isaac. She's got a plan underfoot. And she says to Jacob, "I want you to go in and get your father to give you the blessing." And Jacob says, "There's no way that's going to work. He wants to give it to Esau, and I'm clearly not Esau. Esau is hairy, and I am smooth." And she says, no, we're going to make this happen. So, and I really want you to imagine this. She dresses him in Esau's clothing, right? Big, broad, tall Esau, and here's Jacob in clothes that are too big for him. And then she takes the skin of the sheep that they've butchered for the food and straps it on his arms and along his neck so that he too will be hairy. Are you getting a picture of this in your mind? And with this and the food, he goes into Jacob, and he says to him, "My father, here I am." And Jacob says, "Who are you, my son?" Jacob has his suspicions. Or Isaac has his suspicions. And Jacob says, "Well, I'm Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have told me. Now sit up and eat of my game so that you may bless me." But Isaac says, How is it that you've done this so quickly, my son? And he answers, "Because the Lord your God has granted me success." Insult to injury here. Not only is he lying to his father, he's invoking the name of God to do it now. Going full into this. And then Isaac, who's still a little bit unsure, says, "Come near that I may feel you, my son, and know whether you are really Esau or not." So Jacob goes up to his father Isaac, who feels his arm and holds his hand to his face and feels the sheepskin, and says, "The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau." Remember that Isaac can't really see at this point, so he uses his other senses. He smells Esau on the clothing that Jacob's wearing, and he feels what he thinks is Esau's hairiness, and he gives him a kiss, and he thinks it's Esau, but the voice isn't quite right. But whatever Jacob's suspicions are, or whatever Isaac's suspicions are, Jacob manages to convince him. And so he grants his blessing to Jacob. Now, this seems a little off, isn't it? Because Esau really is the one who's supposed to get this blessing. And this isn't just any blessing. This is the blessing that God gave to Abraham, that Abraham passed on to Isaac, and that Isaac is now passing on to his firstborn. This is powerful stuff. And really the way they understood blessings at that time were that they were irrevocable. Once it had passed, something tangible had changed. Something ontological had changed. Jacob was different now that he had received the blessing, but it had gone to the wrong person. So this whole farce doesn't last for long, because soon enough, Esau comes back, ready with the game and the food that he's prepared for Isaac, and ready to receive his blessing, and says, "Father, here I am. I've done as you asked, and I've brought you the game." And Isaac says, "Who are you, my son?" And Esau says, "Father, it's me, your eldest son Esau. I've done as you asked. I brought you the game. Come and eat of it quickly so that I may receive your blessing." And Isaac says, "I'm sorry, but I can't. I've already blessed your brother Jacob. There's no going back on this. Whether he's deserving of it or not, the blessing's been passed. This bell can't be unrung." So Esau is understandably upset that Jacob's tricked and connived his way into something he feels he deserves. So Esau's pretty angry. And Rebekah, clever as always, sees this and tells Jacob that he better get out of Dodge quick before his brother catches up to him and finds him. And she sort of phrases this as, it's about time you married. You need to go to my brother's house, your uncle Laban, and find yourself a wife. But really what it means is get out of here quick before your brother finds you. And so Jacob's received this blessing, but it's questionable whether he would have identified as #blessed at this point. And so he leaves Beersheba and heads up to Haran across the desert, and he comes to a certain place and night has fallen. He's completely alone. He's stranded. It says that he had to use a stone for a pillow, so I think maybe he didn't have time to leave with anything but what he had on his back. So he comes with this blessing, but without his family, without much to his name, and falls asleep. And when he's asleep, he has the most amazing dream. He dreams that there's a stairway. Some say a translation of a ladder, but really a stairway that goes down from the ground of the earth all the way up to heaven. And the angels of the Lord are descending and ascending the staircase. And then there's God. And God comes and stands next to Jacob, right beside him, and says, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, of your fathers, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your offspring. And your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south, and all the families of the earth shall be blessed in you and your offspring. Know that I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." This echoes the same promise that he gave to Abraham, the same one that Abraham gave to Isaac, and that now lies in Jacob's questionably deserving hands. And so Jacob wakes up from this sleep and says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I didn't even know it." And he was afraid, overcome by all that he had seen and all that had happened, and says, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." And this is where our reading ends today. And it's a little bit of a difficult reading, isn't it? It doesn't quite follow the rules of what we expect. Jacob is not really the hero that we want. He's sort of an underdog, but he uses all of these scheming ways to get what by law, theoretically, is Esau's. And I can tell you, as the oldest sibling of 3, that this rankled me a little bit. It drew up inside of me I would like to say years past, but sometimes present, frustrations of being the oldest child, of not getting my due, of feeling like perhaps I wasn't my parents' favorite, of arguments with siblings, and various benefits schemed away. Now maybe that's just me. I won't speak for all of you, but suffice to say that families can be dysfunctional. And it draws in, I think, at this very place of what we've come to understand as right and wrong. That if you work hard, that if you're a good person, you should get what you deserve. I think this was maybe, if Esau was telling this story, this is what he would say. "I loved my father. I always went out hunting for him and brought him back the game that he liked, and I prepared the food for him just like he said to. I worked hard. I did good things. I paid my taxes, and my brother stole from me." And yet the story leaves Esau at this point and focuses on Jacob. This is the Jacob from whom the 12 tribes of Israel will descend from, yes. The whole future of this people and the future of these stories and the people that we've come to understand ourselves in some ways originate with this anti-hero, this trickster, this schemer, Jacob. And so it leaves us a little uncomfortable because not only does it rub against our sense of what's right and wrong, it inherently connects us with that too. I think I'm not alone in feeling that sometimes we think that there's something that we should get, right? That there's something maybe we deserve and it doesn't happen that way, and there's a sense of that's not fair, that's not right. And this story kind of flips that on its head because Jacob gets the blessing. God doesn't come down and say, "No, you didn't deserve this, I'm taking it back. I'm giving it to Esau, it belongs to him." In some ways, I think when I was reading this story, that's how I expected it to end, right? that justice will be served, that right will be found, that God will somehow intervene for that, but God doesn't. God blesses Jacob. And it's confusing. But I think perhaps part of the lesson in this story is that ultimately this isn't a story about what's right or fair. The lesson of this story is not what we deserve or what we're entitled to. In some ways, God's saying, you can make up all the rules you want about that, but I operate on my own set of rules. I think at its heart that this is a story about families. Families that don't communicate well, families that have dysfunction, families that don't always treat each other with the respect that they're deserved and operate in their best persons. This is a story as old as time. It's a story that we see repeated in Dallas and in The Sopranos and in Game of Thrones and in any number of other TV dramas and often in our own homes, in our own communities. We are wonderfully blessed and flawed people, often dysfunctional, not always great at respect or communication. But the good thing is that God doesn't have a history of choosing the best people for the job. God finds a son of privilege, a poor public speaker, and a murderer, and uses Moses to liberate the people out of Egypt. God takes a family man with an alcohol problem and sets Noah on a boat to protect and to steward the new creation. God finds Jacob where he is, flawed and scheming, and blesses him. Because ultimately this isn't about Jacob being the best person or deserving that blessing, because that's not how God's blessings work. We don't receive the blessings of God because we deserve to. The grace of God blesses us when we're the least deserving. God comes to us where we are, often in places where we're alone, in times of conflict where we're fraught, and finds us and says, oh, just wait, I have plans for you. The families and the stories of the Hebrew Bible are wonderfully and frustratingly complex. There's all sorts of struggle and conflict. And from that, maybe we see echoes in our own lives. And we see perhaps the grace of God that finds us in the midst of our own conflict, in the midst of our dysfunctional relationships, in the midst of our families that have love but have conflict and pain too. And God rolls up God's sleeve and says, just wait, because I have plans for you. Not because you're the best, not because you deserve it, but because I'm here and I love you. God's grace finds us and blesses us. God is with us. Amen.